You're the fifth.
And you're the man who scares nurses before breakfast.
Leave before I make you.
No.
You think you can save me?
No. I think someone is trying to erase you.
Dominic Waverly had not spoken a full sentence in 16 months. Not to his doctors, not to his board, not to the employees who still whispered his name inside the company he had built, and certainly not to Claudia Whitmore, the fiancée who left him 3 weeks after the accident. 4 nurses had entered the Waverly estate believing patients could save him. 4 had left in tears. So when Audrey Bellamy arrived on a rain-soaked Monday morning with 1 suitcase, 1 medical folder, and no fear in her eyes, Dominic already knew what he would do. He would make her quit before dinner. But Audrey did not know that, 30 minutes before her arrival, Dominic's half-brother had stood inside the estate's private study, sliding a cream-colored legal folder across the desk. On the first page were 2 words that could destroy a man without killing him: medical incapacity. Soren Waverly did not need Dominic dead. He only needed him silent long enough to take his vote, his company, his foundation, and the name he no longer had the strength to defend. And Dominic did not know 2 things. Audrey had not come to the Waverly estate by accident. And while he sat by the window, believing his life was over, his own family was preparing to turn his broken body into a business opportunity. Dominic thought the accident had taken his legs. He had no idea someone was using it to take his empire. The Waverly estate stood at the edge of a private lake in Connecticut, hidden behind iron gates, cedar trees, and a driveway long enough to make visitors feel small before they even reached the door. It was white stone, black shutters, glass walls facing the water, and silence so expensive it felt rehearsed. Audrey Bellamy stepped out of the black town car just as thunder rolled over the lake. The driver took her suitcase from the trunk and glanced toward the mansion. "You're sure this is the place?" he asked. Audrey looked up at the house. "Yes." "They say he fires everyone." Audrey reached for her suitcase. "Then I should introduce myself before he gets bored." The driver gave a nervous laugh. Audrey did not. She had worked with difficult patients before. Stroke victims who hated their own bodies. Soldiers who woke up screaming. Executives who treated recovery as if it were a hostile negotiation. She understood pain when it disguised itself as cruelty. But this case was different. Dominic Waverly was not just another patient. Years earlier, his foundation had paid for the surgery that saved her little brother's life. He had done it anonymously. No cameras, no gala speech, no photograph beside a hospital bed. Just a payment made quietly when the Bellamy family had been 3 days away from losing hope. For years, Audrey had not known his name. Then one afternoon, during her rehabilitation training, she reviewed old hospital records and saw the fund attached to her brother's case. Waverly Foundation Pediatric Emergency Initiative. Under it, a scanned authorization. Approved by D. Waverly. That signature had followed her for years. So when Dominic's former attorney, Marion Locke, contacted her through a private rehabilitation agency and asked whether she would accept a difficult live-in assignment, Audrey did not ask about the salary. She asked only one question. "Does he know who I am?" Marion had answered. "No." "Keep it that way," Audrey said. Now, standing beneath the portico of the Waverly estate, Audrey pressed the bell. The door opened almost immediately. Mrs. Evelyn Hart stood inside, dressed in a dark gray uniform, her silver hair pulled neatly back. Her face was careful, but her eyes looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Miss Bellamy?" "Yes." "Come in before the storm follows you." Audrey entered the foyer. Everything inside was perfect. Marble floors, tall mirrors, fresh lilies in silver vases, oil portraits of Waverly men who looked as if they had never apologized in their lives. But beneath the polish, the house felt nervous. A door closed too quickly at the end of the hall. A man's voice lowered behind the study wall. Then Audrey saw it, a folder tucked under the arm of a departing aide. Only for a second, but long enough for her to read one phrase stamped across the corner: Medical Incapacity Review. The aide disappeared before Audrey could ask anything. Mrs. Hart saw Audrey's eyes move. "Mr. Waverly is in the east sitting room," the housekeeper said quickly. "Does he know I'm here?" "He knows someone is here." "That sounds like a no." "He refused to learn your name." Audrey looked down the hall. "Efficient." Mrs. Hart took her coat, then lowered her voice. "There are a few things you should know before you go in." Audrey turned back. "He does not like being touched without warning. He refuses breakfast most mornings. He has not attended physical therapy in weeks. He has dismissed 4 nurses and threatened to sue 2 of them. Has he thrown anything? A glass. Recently? Yesterday. Good, Audrey said. His aim is still clinically relevant. Mrs. Hart almost smiled, but fear pulled it back. Miss Bellamy, this house listens. Audrey studied her. That sounds like advice from someone who has been afraid too long. Before Mrs. Hart could answer, a low voice came from beyond the sitting room doors. Is the 5th one here? Mrs. Hart closed her eyes for half a second. Audrey picked up her medical folder. Yes, she called. The 5th one is here. Silence. Then Dominic Waverly said, Send her in. The sitting room faced the lake through a wall of rain-streaked glass. Dominic sat near the window in a black wheelchair, dressed in a charcoal sweater and dark trousers. His hair was thick and slightly too long. His face was sharper than in the magazine photographs Audrey had seen, cheekbones more pronounced, jaw shadowed, mouth set with elegant contempt. He did not turn when she entered. You're the 5th, he said. I know. Then you know how this ends. Audrey placed her bag beside the chair opposite him. Yes, with you insulting me and me making breakfast anyway. For the first time, Dominic moved. Only his eyes shifted toward her. They were cold, storm gray blue. You think you're clever. No, Audrey said. I think you're predictable. Mrs. Hart froze near the door. Dominic stared at Audrey for a long moment. Then he gave a small, humorless laugh. That's new. I specialize in neurological rehabilitation, Audrey said. Spinal trauma, post-accident depression, motor recovery planning, adaptive independence. I specialize in firing people. Then we both have impressive resumes. His eyes narrowed. You won't last. Probably not if breakfast is as bad as Mrs. Hart implied. Hart made a quiet sound that might have been a cough. Dominic looked back toward the lake. I don't need a nurse. That may be true. I don't need your pity. I didn't bring any. I don't need someone hovering over me with soft hands and false patience, pretending there's dignity in being watched like an old dog dying beside a fireplace. The words were cruel, but Audrey heard what lived beneath them, not arrogance, shame. She walked to the small table near him and looked at the untouched tray. Coffee cold, toast unbroken, eggs untouched. You don't have to eat the eggs, she said. Dominic blinked. I beg your pardon? They look tragic. I wouldn't eat them either. Audrey lifted the tray. I'll make something else. You don't cook for me. I cook for myself. You may benefit accidentally. I said I don't need you. Audrey paused at the door. And I heard you. Then leave. No. The room changed. Even the rain seemed quieter. Dominic's fingers tightened on the armrest of his wheelchair. Everyone leaves. Audrey looked at him, and for one dangerous second, the truth almost escaped her. Not me. Not after what you did for my family. Instead, she said, then you should enjoy the novelty. She walked out with the tray. Behind her, Dominic did not speak, but he did not tell Mrs. Hart to remove her either. That was the first victory. Small, silent, temporary. But Audrey was beginning to understand something no one in that house wanted spoken aloud. Dominic was not simply refusing recovery. Someone was building a case that he never would. By noon, Dominic had refused the new breakfast. By 1, he had refused medication. By 2, he had refused to let Audrey check his blood pressure. By 3, he had said exactly 8 words, all of them insulting. Audrey did not argue with all of them. She chose her battles carefully. That was something Dominic noticed. She did not hover. She did not plead. She did not speak to him in the soft, bright voice people used around tragedy. She simply stayed nearby, calm enough to be annoying. "You count words?" Dominic asked when she marked something in the folder. "I count patterns. I'm not one of your case studies." "No, case studies usually cooperate more." His mouth tightened. Audrey sat across from him. "I'm going to explain the rules." Dominic laughed. "You have rules?" "Yes. This is my house, and this is my license, so we both have something to protect." He stared at her. She continued calmly. "I will not force you to recover. I will not pretend this is easy. I will not touch you without telling you first. I will not lie to make you feel better. And I will not leave because you are rude." Brave speech. It wasn't a speech. It was scheduling. Scheduling? "Yes. We'll begin range of motion work tomorrow morning." "No." "Yes." "I'll refuse." "I assumed." "Then why schedule it?" "Because refusal is still participation." That caught him off guard. He looked away first. Outside, the rain softened over the lake. Then the door opened. A man stepped in without knocking. Soren Waverly looked like the version of Dominic the world still expected to see. Tailored navy suit, polished shoes, silver cufflinks, hair perfectly combed, smile warm enough for cameras and cold enough for enemies. "Dominic," Soren said, "I didn't realize you were occupied." Dominic's face closed. "I'm not." Soren turned to Audrey. "You must be the new nurse." Audrey Bellamy. "Soren Waverly." He extended his hand. "Half-brother, depending on which gossip column you believe. Full-time family disappointment, according to Dominic." Audrey shook his hand. His grip was smooth. Too smooth. "I hope he hasn't frightened you already," Soren said. "No." "Give it time," Dominic said. "What do you want?" Soren sighed, as if wounded by the lack of warmth. "Can't a brother visit?" "No." The smile remained, but something behind Soren's eyes hardened. "I came to discuss the board." Dominic turned back to the window. "Discuss it with the board." "They've been trying. You don't answer." "I built the company. I don't need to answer it like a child called to dinner." Soren's gaze flicked to Audrey, then back to Dominic. "The company still needs governance." "It has governance. It has absence." The word landed with precision. Audrey saw Dominic's hand tighten. Soren stepped closer. "No one wants to pressure you. We all understand recovery is difficult. But silence creates instability. Investors ask questions. Hospitals need decisions. The foundation needs oversight." At the word foundation, Audrey's chest tightened. Dominic said nothing. Soren softened his voice. "I'm trying to protect what you built." Dominic laughed once. It was the ugliest sound Audrey had heard from him. "No, Soren. You're trying to stand close enough to it that people mistake the shadow for yours." Soren's smile vanished for half a second. Then it returned. "Still sharp," he said. "That's reassuring." He turned toward Audrey. "Miss Bellamy, doctor, Crane will brief you on Dominic's medication plan tonight. My brother's condition can appear more stable than it is." Audrey held his gaze. "I prefer to assess patients before accepting other people's conclusions." Soren smiled wider. "Of course, independence is admirable." Then, as he turned to leave, A folded paper slipped slightly from the folder under his arm. Audrey saw only part of the heading, Transfer of Voting Authority. Soren noticed her looking and tucked the paper away. "Be careful, Miss Bellamy," he said pleasantly. "This family has a way of exhausting people who try to help." After he left, Dominic did not speak for nearly an hour. Audrey did not force him. She reviewed the medication tray instead. And that was when she found the second wrong thing. The evening sedative was high, not illegal, not obviously dangerous, but excessive for a man already isolated, withdrawn, and refusing therapy. She checked the timing. Dose increased 4 weeks earlier, 3 days after the first nurse quit. Authorized by Dr. Bennett Crane. Audrey made no note in the official chart. Instead, she wrote in her private notebook, "Sedation may be reducing daytime lucidity." Then she added, "Who benefits if Dominic appears confused?" Because Soren did not need Dominic unconscious forever. He only needed him too tired to defend himself at the right time. That evening, Dr. Bennett Crane arrived at 7. He was handsome in a polished, academic way. Late 50s, rimless glasses, calm voice, the kind of doctor wealthy families trusted because he never appeared surprised by anything. He greeted Audrey outside Dominic's room. "Miss Bellamy, I'm pleased you've joined us." "Dr. Crane, I understand Mr. Waverly has already been difficult." "He has been awake." The doctor's eyes moved slightly. "Awake is not always stable." "No," Audrey said, "but it helps with rehabilitation. Rehabilitation depends on emotional readiness. So does not being over-sedated." The word hung between them. Dr. Crane's expression did not change, but his voice cooled. "I'm sure you don't mean to question a treatment plan after one afternoon. I mean to understand it. Dominic suffers from agitation, insomnia, depressive episodes, and paranoid hostility." "Paranoid hostility toward whom?" "Pardon? Specific targets matter clinically." "Doctor." Crane removed his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth. "His family, his staff, his care team, the board. That's a broad group. Trauma distorts judgment. So does isolation." He replaced his glasses. "You're new here. Be careful not to confuse resistance with insight. And be careful not to confuse silence with incapacity." For the first time, Dr. Crane stopped smiling. "Miss Bellamy," he said softly, "this is a delicate house. Nurses who bring unnecessary tension into it rarely remain employed." Audrey understood the warning. Not just fired, removed, discredited, maybe reported. Her license was her career, her independence, her entire life's work. But she also understood something else. If she stepped back now, Dominic would be left alone with people who benefited from his weakness. Before she could answer, Dr. Crane entered Dominic's room. Audrey stayed in the hall. "Mrs." Hart appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. "You should not make enemies so quickly," the housekeeper whispered. Audrey looked at the closed door. "I didn't make enemies." Inside, Dr. Crane's voice was smooth and low. Audrey could not hear every word, but she heard one phrase clearly. "Temporary measure." Then Dominic's voice, rough and furious. "Get out." A glass shattered. Mrs. Hart flinched. Audrey did not. She walked into the room. Dr. Crane stood near the bed, untouched. Dominic was breathing hard in his wheelchair. A broken water glass lay across the floor. Audrey crossed the room and crouched to pick up the larger pieces. "Don't," Dominic snapped. "I'm not collecting it as evidence against you," Audrey said. "I'm collecting it because glass is sharp." Dr. Crane gave her a look of faint disapproval. "I'll return tomorrow when Mr. Waverly is calmer." Dominic said, "Don't return." "Doctor," Crane turned at the door. "That decision may not remain yours indefinitely." Then he left. Audrey's hand paused above a shard of glass. Dominic heard it too. His face went still. "What did he mean?" Audrey asked. Dominic looked toward the window. "Nothing. Dominic." It was the first time she had used his name without formality. His eyes cut to hers. "Do not say my name like you have a right to it." "I don't need a right. I need an answer. You work here. Yes. You don't belong here. Also, yes. So stop asking questions that can get you removed." Audrey rose slowly, holding the broken glass in a towel. "Is that a warning?" Dominic looked away. "No." Then, after a long silence, he added, "It's advice." By the end of her first week, Audrey understood one thing. Dominic Waverly was not the only person fighting his recovery. Every day followed the same pattern, but Audrey began cutting through it faster. She no longer debated every insult. She did not turn every refusal into a moral lesson. If Dominic refused breakfast, she left it where he could reach it and returned later. If he refused therapy, she documented the refusal, then returned with a smaller task too simple for his pride to reject. Lift your hand, turn your wrist, breathe through the pain. Look at the lake, not at me. The sarcasm remained, but beneath it, the silence began to change, and around that silence, the house kept revealing itself. Soren visited twice more, always dressed as if he had come from a boardroom where everyone admired him. Dr. Crane adjusted medication twice, each time recommending more sedation. Claudia Whitmore called 3 times, and Dominic refused all 3 calls. But Audrey learned why Claudia mattered before she ever saw her. Mrs. Hart left the clue in the pantry under a stack of linen napkins, a draft witness statement. Claudia Whitmore's name sat beneath language that made Audrey's stomach tighten. Dominic did not recognize me clearly. He appeared confused about our engagement. He expressed irrational suspicion toward his family. Audrey read the line again. If Claudia signed that, she would not merely be the woman who abandoned him. She would become emotional proof. The former fiancé, the person the board would believe knew who Dominic had been before the accident. If she said he was no longer himself, cautious men in expensive suits might accept it as grief instead of strategy. Audrey folded the paper carefully. Soren was not collecting evidence. He was collecting voices. And Claudia's voice could make Dominic look lost even while he was sitting awake in his own home. On Friday morning, Audrey arrived in the therapy room to find Dominic already there. He sat in his wheelchair facing the parallel bars, jaw tight, face pale. Audrey stopped at the door. "You're early. I'm bored." "Of me?" "Of the ceiling. That's progress. Don't ruin it." She walked in and placed the therapy folder on the bench. "We'll start with assisted standing." "No. You're sitting in front of the bars." "I wanted to insult them up close." Audrey adjusted the brace beside him. "You can insult them, standing." He looked at the brace. His voice sharpened. "You think I'm afraid?" "Yes." The word struck. Dominic's eyes flashed. Audrey did not soften it. "Fear is not weakness," she said. "Pretending not to feel it is exhausting. You look exhausted." For a moment he said nothing. Then he muttered, "You're very irritating." "I've been told," she explained each movement before touching him. Hands at his elbow, support at his shoulder. Lock the brace, shift forward, breathe. Dominic's body trembled before he even lifted. His face went rigid with humiliation. Audrey saw it and lowered her voice. "Look at the window." "Why?" "Because if you look at me, you'll think I'm watching you fail." "You are watching me fail." "No, I'm watching you begin." He hated that. She knew he hated it because his eyes burned with something too close to tears. But he pushed. His arms shook. His breathing turned harsh. For 3 seconds, Dominic Waverly stood. Not fully. Not beautifully. Not like the man on magazine covers who once crossed stages to applause. But he stood. Then his right leg buckled. Audrey caught him before he fell, But the failure broke something open. He shoved her hand away. Enough. That was good. Do not patronize me. I'm not. I lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds more than yesterday. His face twisted. Is that the line? Is that what they teach you? Smile at the crippled man and applaud the scraps? Audrey's expression changed, but she stayed quiet. Dominic's voice grew crueler because cruelty was easier than grief. People like you always arrive with soft voices and patient smiles, but sooner or later, every kindness sends an invoice. The room went still. Audrey stepped back. For the first time since she arrived, she looked hurt, not professionally concerned. Hurt. Dominic saw it immediately and hated himself for seeing it. Audrey turned away and walked to her bag. Good, Dominic said, because he could not stop. There it is, the offended dignity, the wounded saint. Go ahead, Miss Bellamy. Tell me I'm ungrateful. Tell me I'm impossible. Take your check and leave like the rest. Audrey removed a folded envelope from her bag. Old, soft at the edges, protected for years. She walked back to him. Her voice was quiet. You think I came here for your money? Dominic looked at the envelope. Audrey placed it on his lap. When I was 16, my little brother was dying in a hospital bed. My parents had sold the car. My mother was taking extra shifts until her hand shook. My father stopped eating lunch at work so he could save $12 a day. We were 3 days away from losing his place in the surgery program. Dominic did not move. Audrey's voice trembled, but she did not look away. Then a foundation paid for everything. The rain tapped against the glass. Your foundation. Dominic stared at the letter. He did not open it at first. His hand hovered above it as if the paper might accuse him. Then Audrey reached down and unfolded the first page. Herself. There it was, the hospital letterhead, the authorization number, the emergency fund, the private approval, approved by D. Waverly. Dominic touched the signature with 2 fingers. The gesture was so small that anyone else might have missed it. Audrey did not. His thumb moved over the ink as if he were trying to recognize the man who had signed it. You saved my brother's life, Audrey said, and you never even knew his name. Dominic's face lost its hardness, not all at once, piece by piece. The anger left first, then the contempt, then the mask that had protected him from everything except himself. I don't remember, he said. I know. I signed hundreds of those. I know. I didn't do it for gratitude. That's why I came. He looked up then. Audrey's eyes were bright, but she had not cried. I'm not here because I pity you, she said. I'm here because once, when my family was invisible to people like you helped anyway. You don't get to decide now that your life has no value because your body changed. Dominic looked back down at the letter. His mouth moved once before sound came out. What was his name? Audrey held herself still, because this was the part that hurt. This was the name she had carried into every hospital room, every night shift, every difficult recovery case where hope looked too expensive. Eli, she said. Dominic closed his eyes. The name entered the room like a prayer. Eli, a boy Dominic had never met, a boy who had lived because of a signature Dominic barely remembered, a boy who became proof that Dominic's life had mattered, even during the years when he had mistaken power for legacy. For 16 months, people had told him what he had lost: his mobility, his fiancée, his company's confidence, his image, his place in the world. But no one had placed proof in his lap that the man he used to be had saved a life without needing applause. No one had told him that somewhere in the world, a young man was alive because Dominic Waverly had once chosen mercy in private. Audrey stepped back. I should make tea. I don't want tea. It's not for you. She turned toward the door. Audrey. She stopped. This time, when he said her name, it did not sound like a weapon. It sounded like an apology that had not yet learned how to stand. "I shouldn't have said that." "No," she said. "You shouldn't have." Then she left. Dominic sat alone with the letter on his lap until the room grew dark. That night, he ate half his dinner. Mrs. Hart cried in the pantry where no one could see. Audrey pretended not to notice. And Dominic kept the letter beside his bed. Because for the first time in 16 months, he had proof that the life he wanted to throw away had once kept someone else alive. 2 days later, the document appeared. It happened because Mrs. Hart forgot to be afraid at exactly the right moment. Soren had arrived earlier than usual, accompanied by a junior attorney Audrey had never seen before. They went into the old study, the one Dominic had not entered since before the accident. Audrey was in the hallway reviewing medication times when she heard Soren's voice. "Crane's language is sufficient," the attorney replied. "Sufficient for concern, not necessarily for transfer." "Then make it sufficient. There are safeguards in the trust." "That's what safeguards are for," Soren said coldly. "To be interpreted by people with authority." Audrey stepped back before they opened the door. An hour later, Mrs. Hart entered the laundry room, carrying linens with hands that shook. Hidden between 2 folded towels was a cream-colored folder. She placed it on the table without looking at Audrey. "I believe Mr. Waverly asked for the blue blanket," she said. "He didn't." "No," Mrs. Hart whispered, "but he may need it." Then she left. Audrey opened the folder. The first page carried the Waverly family crest and a title that made her blood go cold. "Petition for temporary transfer of voting authority due to medical incapacity." She read every line. Then again. Then a third time, slower. The language was designed to sound protective, temporary, responsible. But Audrey saw the trap. Dominic controlled a decisive block of voting shares in Waverly Meridian Health. Those shares were protected by a family trust. In simple terms, the trust existed, so no outsider could easily steal the company. But there was one exception. If Dominic were declared mentally incapable of making decisions, his voting power could be transferred to an approved family representative. The named representative was Soren Waverly. If Soren won, Dominic would not wake up poorer first. He would wake up as a guest inside his own company. He could still have money. He could still have the mansion. He could still sit beside the lake. But the voice that built Waverly Meridian Health would no longer count when the future was decided. Attached were medical summaries from Dr. Crane, behavioral instability, refusal of care, paranoid suspicion of family members, inability to participate in executive decision-making. There was also a draft statement from Claudia Whitmore. Dominic failed to recognize me during my last visit and displayed severe confusion regarding our relationship. Audrey's hands tightened around the page. Claudia had not visited, not once since Audrey arrived. Audrey carried the folder to Dominic's room. He was by the window again, the old letter from Audrey's family resting on the side table beside him. He noticed her face. "What happened?" Audrey placed the folder on his lap. "This." Dominic read the title. For several seconds, he did not react. Then the color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" "It was left where I could find it." "By whom?" "Someone still loyal enough to be frightened." Dominic opened the folder. Audrey watched him read. With each page, his expression changed, not into panic, not into sorrow, into something sharper, older. The strategist was waking up. "They're using the medical clause," he said. "Explain it to me like I'm not a corporate attorney." He looked up. "My voting shares are held inside a family trust. If I'm declared mentally incapacitated, my voting authority can temporarily pass to an approved relative." Soren: "Yes. For how long?" "Long enough." "To do what?" Dominic looked back at the page. To sell the part of the company he's always wanted to sell. Northbridge Capital? His eyes lifted. You saw that name? I heard enough. Dominic's jaw tightened. Northbridge buys influence quietly. They would carve out the hospital data division, strip protections, replace loyal board members, and call it efficiency. And the foundation? His silence answered first. Then he said, they could freeze discretionary pediatric emergency funding pending review. Audrey's voice changed. The fund that saved Eli. Yes. Now the threat was no longer legal. It was human. If Soren took Dominic's vote, children like Eli would not be saved by speed and mercy. They would wait for committees. They would wait for approvals. Some families would not have enough time to wait. Audrey sat across from him. What do we do? Dominic looked toward the dark glass. For 16 months, he had let the world move without him. He had mistaken disappearance for dignity. He had called it refusal, when maybe it had been surrender. Then he turned back to Audrey. Bring me my laptop. Audrey stopped breathing for a second. What? If Soren wants my vote, Dominic said, he can ask me while I'm awake. The laptop had dust on it. Mrs. Hart brought it from the study, like she was carrying a sleeping animal that might bite. Dominic's hands were unsteady when Audrey placed it on the table before him, but his eyes were clear. Password? She asked. He gave her a look. I'm paralyzed, not dead. Audrey stepped back. Fair. He typed slowly. The screen lit his face. For a moment, he only stared at it. Hundreds of unread emails, board notices, legal memos, investor updates, foundation requests. His jaw tightened. They buried me while I was breathing, he said. Audrey pulled a chair beside him. Then we start digging. They worked until after midnight. Audrey sorted the medical timeline, medication increases, therapy refusals, Dr. Crane's notes, periods when Dominic was most sedated, visitors present before or after episodes of supposed agitation. Dominic reviewed corporate records with a focus that transformed the room. He discovered that 3 board meetings had been scheduled without proper notice to his personal counsel. A special governance review had been opened 6 weeks earlier. Soren had held private conversations with Northbridge Capital, the fund Dominic had rejected twice. Claudia's draft statement had been circulated to Crane. Dr. Crane had recommended permanent supervisory control. And most dangerous of all, a board vote had been scheduled for Friday, 4 days away. They moved it up, Dominic said. Audrey looked at the clock. It was nearly 1 in the morning. Can they do that? They already did. Can you stop it? Dominic leaned back, exhaustion cutting through his concentration. The old way? Yes. And now? He looked down at his legs. Audrey closed the laptop halfway. Do not answer that from the chair. His eyes lifted. What? Answer it from your mind. A faint, tired smile touched his mouth. You're very bossy for someone who technically works for me. No, Audrey said. Technically, I work for your recovery. Something in his expression shifted, softened. Marion Locke, he said. The attorney? My attorney, before Soren pushed her out. Can you reach her? If she still uses the emergency channel. Audrey raised an eyebrow. You have an emergency channel with your lawyer? I was rich before I was miserable. This time, Audrey smiled. Dominic saw it. And for reasons he did not understand, the room felt warmer. But the clock had already started. Soren had moved the board. Claudia had a statement ready. Crane had the medical file. Dominic had 4 days to prove he was not a ghost inside his own life. Marion Locke arrived the next afternoon, wearing a camel coat, black gloves, and the expression of a woman who had spent her entire career making powerful men regret underestimating her. She was in her 60s, elegant, severe, and entirely unimpressed by the Waverly estate. When she entered Dominic's sitting room, She stopped 3 feet from his wheelchair. Dominic. Marion, you look terrible. I missed you too. Her gaze moved to Audrey. You must be Miss Bellamy. Yes. Good. You found the document. Audrey blinked. You knew? I suspected. Soren has the patience of a snake, but the vanity of a peacock. He was always going to show too much of his feathers. Dominic said, Can he win? Marion removed her gloves. Yes. The answer silenced the room. Then she added, If you continue behaving like a ghost. Dominic's face hardened. Marion sat without invitation. The clause is real. The petition is real. The board has authority to approve temporary transfer if they believe you cannot make decisions. Audrey asked, And Dr. Crane's reports? Useful enough to frighten cautious people. Claudia's statement is false. False can still win if it arrives dressed as concern. Dominic looked at Marion. What do you need? I need proof you are lucid. Proof Crane shaped the medical narrative. Proof Soren prepared financial moves before receiving authority. Proof Claudia lied, and I need you present at the board meeting. Dominic looked away. The room tightened around his silence. Audrey said nothing. Marion's voice softened, but only slightly. Dominic, they do not need you dead. They only need you absent. His hand closed on the armrest. They may have counted correctly. Audrey turned to him. No. He laughed bitterly. You think courage fixes nerve damage? No. I think showing up ruins theft. Marion watched them carefully. Dominic looked at Audrey. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Dominic said, What do we have? Audrey opened her notebook. Medication timeline, visitor logs, therapy records, my observations. The night Dr. Crane suggested a temporary measure. Claudia's draft statement about a visit that did not happen. Marion nodded. Good, we build from there. And Soren? Dominic asked. Marion's smile was cold. Soren wants a boardroom. We'll give him one. The next days changed the house. Not loudly, not magically. Dominic did not suddenly become kind. He still snapped when tired. He still refused help when pride hurt more than pain. He still stared too long at the lake, haunted by the life he could not return to. But he began answering emails, then making calls, then reviewing documents, then attending therapy without Audrey having to ask twice. The first time he stood for 10 seconds, Audrey said nothing. She only nodded. That meant more to him than applause. At night, they worked through evidence. Audrey often fell asleep before him, curled on the far end of the sofa with her notebook open on her lap. The first time it happened, Dominic stared at her for several minutes. Not because she looked fragile. Audrey never looked fragile. But because she had stayed. People had stayed in his house before because they were paid to. Because they feared his name. Because they wanted access to what his name could buy. Audrey stayed like leaving had never occurred to her. Dominic lifted the cashmere throw from the back of his chair and placed it over her shoulders. She opened her eyes just enough to see him. Neither spoke. Then she closed them again. The next morning, the blanket was folded beside him. On top of it was a note. Your aim has improved. You got the blanket mostly on me. Dominic read it twice, then smiled, not sarcastically, not cruelly, a real smile, small, private, alive. Later that morning, Audrey found him in the study, reading a foundation report. You're supposed to rest between sessions, she said. I am resting emotionally. That is not a medical category. It should be. She noticed the page in front of him. Pediatric emergency approvals. Dozens of names. Dozens of families. Dominic touched the paper once, then pushed it away. I don't remember most of them. You don't have to remember every name for it to matter. He looked at her. You remember Eli. I remember the sound my mother made when she realized he would live. Dominic absorbed that quietly. Then he said, I wish I had known. Audrey's voice softened. You know now. Their eyes held a moment too long. Neither moved closer. Neither needed to. Something was changing between them, but it did not rush. It gathered, in pauses, in quiet. In the way Dominic began to look for her before speaking. In the way Audrey stopped calling him Mr. Waverly, except when she was annoyed. In the way he protected her name in rooms where others still tried to reduce her to a nurse. But peace, in houses like Waverly, never lasted long. Claudia Whitmore returned on Thursday. She arrived in a white coat and black heels, carrying an umbrella she never opened because Soren's driver walked her to the door. Audrey saw her from the upstairs landing. Claudia was beautiful in a curated way. Blonde hair swept into a soft knot. Diamond earrings small enough to look inherited. Face arranged into concern. The kind of woman who knew how to appear heartbroken from the correct angle. But Audrey knew better now. Claudia was not coming back as a wounded ex-fiancé. She was coming back as a witness. If she could make Dominic doubt Audrey, or make Dominic lose control, Soren would have one more line for the board. Emotionally unstable, confused, paranoid, unfit, Mrs. Hart announced her with visible discomfort. Miss Whitmore is here. Dominic was in the sitting room with Audrey, reviewing a transcript of Soren's Northbridge call. His hand froze. Audrey saw the old wound open before he covered it. Send her away, Dominic said. Claudia entered anyway. Dominic. Her voice was soft. Too soft. Audrey closed the folder. Claudia's eyes moved over Dominic's wheelchair, the laptop, the documents, then Audrey. The calculation was immediate. You look better, Claudia said. Dominic's face became unreadable. That seems to disappoint everyone, Claudia flinched delicately. I deserved that. Yes, I heard you were struggling. From Soren? From people who care. Audrey almost laughed. Dominic did not. Claudia stepped closer. I wanted to see you. You left. Pain crossed her face, or something rehearsed to resemble it. I was afraid. I was paralyzed. You were afraid. Her eyes lowered. I know. No, Dominic said. You know I survived. Claudia's expression tightened. Audrey watched from beside the window, silent. Claudia turned toward her. And this is? Audrey Bellamy, Audrey said. Claudia's smile was polite enough to cut. It must be comforting, having someone paid to care. The room went silent. Dominic's head turned slowly. Audrey could have answered. She did not need to. Dominic did. Careful, Claudia, he said. She stayed in the room you ran from. Claudia's face changed. Just for a moment, the softness disappeared. Under it was resentment. You think she's different? Claudia asked. Dominic, she works for you. Dominic's voice was calm. So did half the people who betrayed me. Claudia looked at Audrey again. Does he know why you're really here? Audrey's body stilled. Dominic noticed. Claudia smiled, sensing blood. Soren told me Marion found you, a loyal nurse, a touching backstory, a man desperate enough to believe devotion because the alternative is unbearable. Dominic looked at Audrey. For the first time in days, doubt entered the room. Audrey's stomach tightened. Claudia stepped closer. Did she tell you before or after she learned your foundation paid for her brother? Dominic said nothing. Audrey took one breath, then another. I told him, she said. Claudia blinked. When? When it mattered. How noble. Audrey walked toward her, calm and steady. No, Claudia. Noble would have been staying when the man you claimed to love woke up in a body he didn't recognize. I'm only stubborn, Claudia's eyes flashed. You have no idea what that life was like. Audrey's voice lowered. You're right. I know what hospital waiting rooms look like when money runs out. I know what it feels like to pray for strangers to be generous. I know what it means when one signature lets a family keep a child alive. Dominic watched her, silent. Audrey continued. What I don't know is how you looked at a man in pain and decided his suffering was inconvenient. Claudia's hand tightened around her purse. Dominic's voice cut in. Why are you here? Claudia looked back at him. I wanted to apologize. No. He rolled closer, slowly, deliberately. You came because Soren told you I was improving. You came because your statement matters less if I can look you in the eye and remember exactly who abandoned me. Her face paled. That isn't fair. No, Dominic said. Fair would have been honesty 16 months ago. Claudia's mask cracked. You were cruel before the accident too, Dominic. You were impossible. You loved your company more than you loved me. Dominic absorbed the blow, then nodded once. Maybe. Audrey looked at him. That one word cost him. But I did not deserve to be erased, he said. Claudia had no answer. When she left, the room remained heavy. Dominic turned his chair toward the lake. Audrey said quietly, She wanted to shake you. She did. No, she tried. He looked at her. You should have told me Marion found you. Yes. The honesty surprised him. Audrey did not defend herself. I should have told you everything sooner. I was afraid if you knew, you'd send me away before I could help. I might have. I know. He studied her face. Is there anything else? No. A pause. Then Audrey said, Except that your eggs are still terrible. Dominic stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was quiet, rough, brief, but it was laughter. And in the doorway, Mrs. Hart pressed a hand to her mouth. Claudia had failed to break him emotionally, but Audrey knew she had not come only to apologize. She had come to test the room, and whatever she reported to Soren, the board meeting would no longer wait. The board meeting was moved up again, 48 hours. Soren sent the notice at midnight, hidden beneath procedural language and marked urgent. Marion called it desperate. Dominic called it predictable. Audrey called it war. They worked without sleep. Marion prepared a legal objection. Dominic prepared a statement. Audrey prepared the medical evidence. Mrs. Hart found security footage logs showing Claudia had not visited on the date her statement claimed. A junior nurse from a prior agency agreed to confirm that Dr. Crane had instructed staff to describe Dominic as confused after sedative increases. Everything was almost ready. Then Dr. Crane came at 9, the night before the meeting, with a syringe in a sealed medical case. Audrey met him in the hallway. What is that? Medication. For what? Mr. Waverly is agitated. He's reviewing board documents. That may be the cause. Audrey stepped in front of the door. You are not sedating him tonight. Doctor, Crane's eyes cooled. Miss Bellamy, move aside. No, you are obstructing medical care. I am preventing non-emergency sedation of a lucid patient hours before a legal proceeding involving his competency. His face changed. You're out of your depth. Then explain the indication. Acute psychological distress. Documented by whom? By me. Observed by whom? He stepped closer. If you continue interfering, I will have you removed from this house tonight. I will notify the agency that you are emotionally compromised. I will make sure your license is reviewed before you ever enter another private case. Audrey felt the threat hit exactly where he intended. Her career, her credibility, her future, everything she had built. For 1 second, fear moved through her. Dr. Crane saw it and smiled. Then Dominic's door opened behind her. Dominic sat there, pale but upright. What are you giving me, Bennett? Crane's expression softened instantly. Dominic, you need rest. I asked what you are giving me. A mild sedative. Name. Dr. Crane hesitated. Audrey saw it. Dominic saw it too. Leave, Dominic said. Dr. Crane's jaw tightened. You are making this worse for yourself. No, Dominic said. For once, I'm making it worse for you. Audrey lifted her phone. I recorded this conversation from the moment you opened the case. Dr. Crane looked at her with hatred so controlled it was almost elegant. You have no idea what family power can do. Audrey smiled without warmth. I know exactly what family power can do. I also know what evidence does. Dr. Crane turned to Dominic. You would let a nurse destroy your family's reputation? Dominic's voice was low. No, I'm letting her save what my family tried to destroy. Dr. Crane left, but the damage was done, not to the case, to Dominic. After the door closed, his strength seemed to collapse inward. He rolled back toward the window. Audrey followed. Dominic, he laughed bitterly. How many people were waiting for the chance? Soren, Crane, Claudia. No, how many people looked at me and saw an opening? Audrey did not answer. He looked exhausted beyond sleep. Maybe Soren is right. No, you don't know what I was like. I know what you are like. I was arrogant, controlling, absent. I built hospitals but missed birthdays. I funded surgeries but forgot names. I won every room and lost every person in it. Audrey stepped closer. That does not mean they get to steal your life. What life? The words came out raw. He looked at her, and there was no cruelty left, only grief. What life, Audrey? The one where I measure progress in seconds? The one where a woman has to tell me when to breathe before I stand? The one where my brother can take my company because half the world finds it believable that I'm no longer a man? Audrey let the words land. Then she said, very quietly, Then let him take the company. Dominic stared at her. What? Let him take the mansion, the cars, the shares, the boardroom. His face tightened with betrayal. She stepped closer. But don't let him take the man who built all of it. The room went still. Audrey's voice softened. You think tomorrow is about proving you're strong enough to own a company? It's not. It's about proving you are still here. Dominic looked away, but she saw his eyes shine. You saved my brother without ever knowing his name, she said. Maybe you were arrogant. Maybe you were impossible. Maybe you loved your work because it was safer than loving people. But somewhere inside all of that, you built something that gave families like mine a miracle when no one else would. She knelt in front of his chair, careful not to touch him without permission. So, tomorrow, don't stand for the board. Don't stand for Soren. Don't stand for me. His eyes returned to hers. Stand for the boy whose name you didn't know. Dominic closed his eyes. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he reached for her hand. Audrey gave it to him. His grip was weak, but real. I want to walk in, he said. Audrey's heart clenched. Dominic. Not far, not foolishly. The chair can be there, the cane, the brace, you beside me. You don't need to prove. Yes, he said, I do. Not to them, she understood. To himself. The boardroom of Waverly Meridian Health occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Manhattan. Dominic had designed it to intimidate investors without making patients feel small. Now it was being used to decide whether he had become too broken to own his own voice. Soren arrived early. He wore a black suit and a silver tie. Somber, respectful, almost grieving. Claudia sat near the end of the room, hands folded, eyes lowered. Dr. Crane placed his file before the board with clinical solemnity. The directors whispered among themselves. Some were loyal to Dominic. Some were afraid. Some had already calculated which side would survive. Soren stood at the head of the table. Thank you all for coming under difficult circumstances, he said. None of us wanted this. My brother is not only the founder of this company, He is the reason many of us are here, but leadership sometimes requires painful responsibility. The door remained closed. Soren glanced at it. No Dominic. A flicker of satisfaction crossed his face. He continued. This petition is not a punishment. It is a temporary safeguard. Dominic's recovery must come first. The company must remain stable. The foundation must continue under proper supervision. Marion Locke sat near the opposite end of the table. She said nothing. Soren looked at her. Of course, all interested parties will be heard. Dr. Crane opened his file. In my medical opinion, Mr. Waverly has demonstrated prolonged instability, impaired judgment, resistance to necessary care, and episodes of paranoia directed at family members and staff. Claudia lowered her eyes further. Soren's voice softened. Miss Whitmore, I know this is difficult. She nodded, perfectly wounded. I loved Dominic, she said. I still care for him deeply, but when I saw him, he was not himself. He seemed confused, suspicious. He accused people of conspiring against him. Marion's pen stopped moving. Soren looked around the table. I wish there were another way. Then the doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for every head to turn. Soren had expected a broken man. The board had expected a video call. Claudia had expected silence. But Dominic Waverly entered the room. He was in his wheelchair at first, Audrey beside him, one hand steady on the back of the chair, but not pushing until he gave the nod. He wore a dark suit tailored to hide what could be hidden and honor what could not. His face was pale. His body carried the cost of every hour without sleep. But his eyes were clear. The room fell completely silent. Dominic rolled to the end of the table. Then he stopped. Audrey moved beside him with the cane. A murmur passed through the board. Dominic locked the chair. His hands trembled. Audrey leaned close, enough that only he could hear. Breathe. He did. Then, with the brace under his suit and the cane in his right hand, Dominic Waverly stood. Not easily, not perfectly. For one terrifying second, Audrey thought his knees would fail, but they did not. Dominic took one step, then another, then a third. Enough. The room had seen what it needed to see. Audrey brought the chair behind him, and he sat with controlled precision, refusing to collapse. Soren's face had gone rigid. Dominic placed both hands on the table. You mistook my silence for consent, he said. That was your first mistake. No one moved. Dominic turned to Dr. Crane. Your reports describe paranoia. You failed to mention that the behavior you documented increased after you raised my sedatives. Audrey distributed the timeline. Marion activated the boardroom screen. Dates appeared. Dose changes. Visitor logs. Therapy cancellations. Cranes. Recommendations. Dominic continued. You described refusal of care. My nurse documented that I participated in rehabilitation when sedation was reduced. Audrey placed the therapy records on the table. Several directors looked at her differently now, not as staff, as the person who had seen the truth before any of them had the courage to ask. Dominic's voice sharpened. You described suspicion of family members as irrational, yet my half-brother was negotiating with Northbridge Capital before any transfer of voting authority had been approved. Marion displayed the call logs and draft term sheet. The directors began whispering. Soren's voice cut through. This is a distortion. Dominic looked at him. No, Soren, this is chronology. Marion stood. Under Section 9 of the Waverly Family Trust, any proposed transfer of voting authority is automatically suspended if the named representative has engaged in undisclosed negotiations that would materially alter company control prior to approval. Soren's face changed. For the first time, he was not leading the room. He was chasing it. Dominic turned to Claudia. And then there is Miss Whitmore. Claudia's lips parted. Dominic's voice did not shake. Your statement says I failed to recognize you during a visit on March 12th. She swallowed. Yes. You did not visit on March 12th. You did not enter my house. You did not sign the visitor log. Your car was not recorded at the gate. Marion clicked once. Security logs appeared on screen. Then a second image. Claudia entering Soren's apartment building that same evening. No commentary, no insult, just evidence. The room did the humiliating for him. Claudia stood too quickly. That is private. Dominic's gaze did not move from her face. So was my incapacity petition. A director near the window looked away. Another whispered, Good God. Claudia looked at Soren. It was the worst thing she could have done. Every director saw it. Dominic leaned back. As for the foundation, he said, voice lower now, Soren's restructuring proposal would freeze discretionary pediatric emergency funding for 90 days pending review. He paused. Audrey felt the words hit him before he spoke them. That fund pays for children whose families do not have 90 days. The room went quiet. No one shifted papers. No one checked a phone. Dominic looked at the board. I built Waverly Meridian Health to innovate. I built the foundation to remember why innovation mattered. Then he turned to Soren. You wanted my votes, my company, my name, but you were never interested in the responsibility attached to them. Soren's mask finally broke. You arrogant bastard, he said. You think you're the only one capable of leading? You sat in that house for 16 months, rotting in front of a lake, while the rest of us kept the world moving. Dominic nodded. You're right. The admission silenced Soren. Dominic continued. I disappeared. I let grief make decisions for me. I gave you room to become dangerous. His voice hardened. That ends today. Marion addressed the board. We are requesting immediate suspension of the incapacity petition, independent review of Dr. Crane's conduct, investigation of undisclosed negotiations with Northbridge Capital, and temporary protection of foundation funding under the Independent Charitable Charter. The chairman, Peter Ashford, looked shaken. Dr. Crane, he said, did you attempt to administer sedatives to Mr. Waverly last night? Dr. Crane's face remained calm. No. Audrey lifted her phone. Yes, she said. The recording played. Doctor, Crane's voice filled the boardroom. Dominic, you need rest. What are you giving me, Bennett? A mild sedative. Name. Silence. Then Dominic's voice. Leave. Then Crane's threat to Audrey. I will notify the agency that you are emotionally compromised. I will make sure your license is reviewed. By the time the recording ended, Dr. Crane was finished. Not legally, not yet, but socially, professionally, completely. Peter Ashford looked at Audrey. Miss Bellamy, you recorded that at personal risk? Audrey glanced at Dominic before answering. Yes. Why? Audrey's voice was calm. Because no patient should be sedated into losing his rights. The room absorbed that. Dominic did not look away from her. The vote never happened. Soren lost the room before Marion finished speaking. By noon, the board suspended the petition. By 1, Northbridge issued a statement denying formal negotiations. By 2, Dr. Crane was placed under review. By 3, Claudia's statement was withdrawn by her attorney. And by 4, Soren Waverly walked out of the building without a single director following him. Dominic remained in the boardroom after everyone else left. The city burned gold beyond the windows. Audrey stood beside him, exhausted. Marion gathered her files. Well, she said, that was moderately satisfying. Dominic looked at her. Thank you. Marion paused. In all the years she had known him, Dominic Waverly had said thank you rarely, and usually as a formality. This was not formality. She nodded once. Don't disappear again. Then she left. Audrey and Dominic were alone. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Dominic said, "I stood," Audrey smiled. "Yes, 3 steps. 3 very dramatic steps." He looked up at her. "I couldn't have done it without you." Something in her chest tightened. "Yes, you could have." "No," he said. "I could have won without you. Maybe. With Marion. With documents. With strategy." His voice softened. "But I would not have wanted to stand." Audrey looked away first, because if she did not, she might cry. The weeks after the boardroom did not become easy. That would have been a lie. Dominic still had pain. There were bad mornings when his legs would not respond, when frustration made him silent, when memory turned the lake outside his window into an accusation. But the silence was different now. It was no longer a locked door. It was a room Audrey was allowed to enter. Soren was removed from all executive committees pending investigation. Dr. Crane resigned before the medical board could finish its review. Claudia left New York for Europe, though gossip columns called it a wellness retreat. Mrs. Hart stopped shaking when the doorbell rang. Marion returned as Dominic's legal counsel, and Waverly Meridian Health did not fall. But Audrey knew her role was changing. Dominic had a new medical team now, a stronger rehab plan, legal protection, corporate control, foundation safeguards, people around him who no longer treated his life as a waiting room. So one evening, after placing her folded uniforms into her suitcase, Audrey stood in the guest room and told herself the truth. Her work was done. She was closing the suitcase when Dominic appeared at the doorway. He was in his chair, but the cane rested across his lap. "You're leaving," he said. Audrey closed her eyes briefly. "I was going to tell you." "When? After the car arrived?" She turned. "That's unfair." "Yes," he said. "I'm discovering I dislike being noble." That almost made her smile, but only almost. "You don't need me anymore," she said. Dominic looked at the suitcase, then at her. "That's where you're wrong." "Dominic." "At first," he said, "I needed you because I had forgotten how to fight." Audrey's throat tightened. "Then I needed you because you were the only person telling me the truth." He moved closer. "Now I don't need you as my nurse." She looked down, because that was what she had been trying to say. But Dominic continued, "I want you in my life because I love you." The words were quiet. No performance, no boardroom power, no billionaire command. Just a man finally brave enough to ask without control. Audrey stared at him. "You shouldn't say that because you're grateful." "I'm not. Or because I stayed. I love you because you stayed when staying was difficult, but that isn't gratitude." He reached for the cane and stood slowly. Audrey moved instinctively, but he lifted one hand. "Let me." She stopped. He stood before her, unsteady but upright. "I love you," he said, "because you looked at the worst version of me and refused to pretend it was the only version left." Audrey's eyes filled. "I didn't fall in love with the billionaire." A small smile touched his mouth. "That is inconvenient. The billionaire comes with the house." She laughed through the tears. "I fell in love with the man who was broken and still chose to protect everyone else." Dominic's expression softened into something almost afraid. Audrey stepped closer. This time, she touched his face without asking, and he leaned into her hand like a man coming home from a long, brutal war. Their first kiss was not desperate. It was careful, earned. A promise made by two people who understood that love did not erase damage. It simply gave them somewhere safe to heal. Months later, the Waverly Foundation held its annual gala in the same Manhattan Tower where Dominic had nearly lost everything. But this time, the room was different. No whispers of incapacity, no pity dressed as politeness, no Soren waiting in the corner with a knife behind his smile. Dominic stood backstage in a black tuxedo, one hand on his cane, the other in Audrey's. "You're nervous," she said. "I'm reconsidering public speaking as a concept." "You used to do this all the time." "I used to have fewer feelings," Audrey smiled. "That must have been efficient." "Very." From the stage, Marion introduced him. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dominic Waverly." The applause rose before he appeared. Dominic took one breath. Audrey squeezed his hand. Then he walked onto the stage. Slowly, carefully, not perfectly. The room stood. Dominic stopped at the podium and looked out across the faces. In the front row sat Mrs. Hart, crying openly now because fear no longer owned her. Beside her sat Marion, pretending not to be emotional, and next to Audrey's mother sat a young man with familiar eyes. Eli Bellamy, healthy, alive, watching the man whose signature had saved his life. Dominic looked at Audrey. She nodded. He turned back to the microphone. "Years ago," he said, "this foundation paid for a child's surgery. I did not know his name. I did not meet his family. I signed a document and moved on to the next crisis, the next meeting, the next room where I thought power lived." The room was silent. "I was wrong about many things then. I thought legacy was what carried your name after you left a room. I know now it is what happens in lives you may never enter." Audrey's eyes filled. Dominic continued. "Tonight, the Waverly Foundation is launching the Bellamy Pediatric Access Program, dedicated to emergency surgeries for children whose families cannot wait for wealth to decide whether they deserve hope." The applause came like thunder. Eli stood. Audrey covered her mouth. Dominic looked at her, and for a moment the room disappeared. There was no board, no empire, no accident, no stolen months. Only the strange, impossible circle of mercy returning years later in the form of a woman who refused to leave. Dominic stepped away from the podium. Audrey met him at the side of the stage. "You named it after my family," she whispered. "I owed Eli a name." "You didn't owe us anything," Dominic touched her cheek. "That's what makes it worth giving." Across the room, cameras flashed. Donors applauded. The Waverly name shone behind them in gold letters. But Dominic no longer mistook the name for the man. Years ago, Dominic Waverly saved a boy whose name he never knew. Years later, that boy's sister walked into his house and saved him from losing himself. And for the first time since the accident, Dominic understood that love was not the thing that made a powerful man weak. It was the reason he stood again,